These comic books took an eternity to get here. Hey there, today I have an unboxing video, and in this video I'm going to open up a set of comic books that I won at auction off of the platform HipComic from the seller Infinity Comics. I go up and down with this seller, and it has really nothing to do with them. It's really more of my own budget, the comics that I'm into, and right now what I'm into is finding books that I think are just slightly undergraded, that I think can have a grade bump, which hopefully means a little bit of a value bump if the books were to get at least pressed, if not cleaned and pressed. And there are two types of books that I look for. I'm looking for books that are already in high grade. Now, they don't have to be listed as near mint. Most of the comics that Infinity lists are not near mint to begin with. Even their moderns are typically listed as near mint minus. But for older books that I target, which is Bronze Age, Copper Age, even silver in the case of this unboxing, you'll see the maximum grade that a book is given typically be a VF+. And what I've noticed by analyzing hundreds of scans and the comic book values that go along with the comics associated with those scans is that there is kind of a threshold in terms of which books could possibly be improved. And I believe that that is 7.0 to 8.5. That's kind of the sweet spot of books that I look for on Infinity Comics, where I feel like I'll go ahead and adjust my bid ranges accordingly. And if nothing else, it allows me to focus on a subset of auctions that are worth my time. Meaning, if I see a book that says moisture damage, detached cover as maybe a 2.0 or something that like extremely low grade, it's not even worth checking. Even if it's a mega key, it's just in such rough shape, it's just not worth it. And a book like that really is probably not going to be able to be improved or conserved beyond that. Whereas if we look at some of the books that I targeted in this unboxing, I'll point out some of the comics that are within that range. The second type of book is not necessarily a book I target, but it would be some book of significance, a great cover, a key issue, where I will lower my standards a little bit in terms of those grade ranges that I find acceptable. But here's the difference, that this is the different approach that I take. So if I have a book that I'm looking at in that 7.0 to 8.5 range, I create a list of those, and then I go through the list and I look at the scan. And then within the scan itself, as I'm observing it and I'm zooming in as if I'm grading the book in person, if I don't see any real major visible spine ticks, I go ahead and bid on the book. And my logic is, of course, with cleaning and pressing, color breaks, color rub, color breaking spine ticks, soft corners, frayed corners, none of those defects can be improved. So if I see in a scan that the seller has assigned a particular grade to the book, but the book will have pressable defects, those are the books I target at auction. And those are the primary books. Those are the books that I'd love to pick up, and I will actually increase my max bid accordingly to target those books. The second are books that I would say that are in kind of like the 5 to 7 range. Those I think are accurately graded by the seller in mid-grade. For the most part, I still would recommend looking at the scans always. And for those, I leave my calculations alone, meaning if I am evaluating the book as a 6.0, that's what the seller has it, and that's what my bid ranges are based off of, that 6.0 value, and even the book in fine condition raw. And then maybe I'll throw up my target bid, which is essentially like a medium range bid, and then I cross my fingers and I hope I get that book. And in a lot of cases, I will still win those books just because I think people are doing what I'm doing, which is they're clicking on scans and they're looking for books that are listed in that 7.0 to 9.2 that they feel are probably more like 9.4 and above. And I've been doing this probably too much over the last few weeks. It really has been my target more so than any other source. I would like to personally thank Mile High Comics for reducing their coupon to 50%. when they do that, that's an immediate hiatus for me from buying from them. I just wait until they max out the coupon at 60%, which they did recently, and I did place an order, and that order is in transit. But because of the 50% hiatus I was on, I targeted HipComic for purchasing back issues. I did want to make one announcement of something that I'm going to change for the channel going forward. I did receive a lot of feedback related to just how verbose I might get about comic books, the comics themselves, grading, and everything else I want to talk about because it is my channel. But I think I've realized that the order summary, based on my analytics, is really not something that everyone is interested in. And what I would like to also do is reward my YouTube channel members for their support. And what I'm going to do is end up splitting this recording into two parts. And the first part will be this part, the unboxing. The second part, the detailed kind of comic book data nerd out in a spreadsheet. I'm going to start moving those to channel member only videos and have that be more of a conversational. I may even do live streams with those specifically just for channel members and kind of schedule those out. I haven't quite figured out exactly how I'm going to do that, but I'd like to keep these videos a little bit shorter and neater and more focused on the books themselves and talk about why I picked them up, and then reveal what I paid for the books, what were my final bids, and how does that final bid compare to fair market value, and if I were to get the books graded, what kind of ceiling was I looking at in terms of value. That breakdown and that analysis will be moved specifically for channel members. So if you're interested in channel membership, it's 99 cents a month, and you can click the join button below this video to check out the membership details, or you can go to youtube.com/moneyballcomics/join, and that will take you directly to the membership information. So if you like what I do here and you're interested in that type of content, please consider supporting me through the channel membership. Now, as I have talked too much, let's get to the comic books so I can show you what I picked up recently at auction from Infinity Comics on HipComic. Okay, here's the order that I received from Infinity Comics. I received it on January 25th, 2024, so a very recent set of books that I won at auction. Sometimes they'll send books via USPS like this. Sometimes it's through UPS. Sometimes there's signature required. I will say this before I unbox it. I wanted to show, I may contact them about this. I feel like for the amount of money I'm spending with them, they could at least afford to maybe use a more enclosed type of packaging. I mean, with these books exposed, I mean, you can get like really into the corners themselves if something were to fall in here, like I don't know, a rock or a squirrel or something, and start to affect the corners of those books. So I may reach out to them and see if I can request something other than a Gemini mailer, and you can see it's just absolutely squished in terms of wrapping the Gemini mailer around the books and trying to get all of this in that single shipment. I pay tax, I pay shipping, I pay a lot of money for this. I think the least they can do is spend an extra couple of bucks and get a better box for the comics. So I'll reach out to them and see if I can get some feedback on that. But let me get this opened up and take a look at the books and the condition of the books that I picked up. Okay, here we go. The books were wrapped in like an outer plastic package, so they were technically sealed, and obviously they're sealed in a bag and board here. So it's not like there was loose comic book paper that could be affected by the elements because of how they packed the books, but I'm just saying like there's some impact that could get through that slot in the Gemini mailer. Anyway, I'm being picky here. Let's look at the comics instead of talking about the cardboard box. Here we go. The first book is Thor, number 131. And this is an example of one of those books that is in that sort of 5.5 to 7.0 range that I'm going to go ahead and allow for spine ticks to be on here just because of the age of the book, the cover. But I mean, it's from 1966, penciled by Jack Kirby, written by Stan Lee, cover art by Kirby as well. And so these are the types of books that I'll find that sort of mid-grade range. And what I'll do is it's a balance of the CGC value and the cover price fair market value. And I use all of that to kind of determine what my bid should be on this book. But I just thought this was a very, very presentable mid-grade comic. Thor 131 from 1966. Next is Strange Tales number 142. This was listed as a Fine Plus. I honestly just feel like they would be better off just calling it mid-grade, because the nuances between this, and let's look at the difference real quick. So this Strange Tales 142 was a Fine Plus, but 131, Thor 131 was listed in fine condition, and I feel like the Strange Tales book, just kind of going up and down the spine. Maybe you could argue the corners down there, definitely rougher on the Thor book, a little bit cleaner at the top. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're right. But very close in condition. So that fine plus. I don't take too much stock into the nuances. Again, I'm not buying Hulk 181s where we're talking about hundreds of dollars between grade points. So I just kind of throw it all into that range that I talked about, the 5.5 to 7.0. I feel like it's just kind of one of the more difficult ranges to get a precise grade on. But what I look for is not a terribly thrashed and damaged spine, as sharp corners as I can get for the age and my budget. And then just also the colors, the presentation, trying to get really bright, vibrant colors, something that would look nostalgic if I did get it graded and hung on the wall. So this is Strange Tales 142, not a big key. Second appearance of Mentallo on this one. But as the market seems to continue to correct, I'm going back and finding older books in mid-grade or in that range to hopefully improve on, and we'll get to some of those. But continuing on with more great Silver Age goodness, this is Strange Tales 138. This was me having fun at the beginning of this video where I talked about it taking an eternity to get here. No offense to Infinity Comics, they shipped this very quickly. This is the first appearance of Eternity. This book was popular right when the announcement of Thor, Love and Thunder came out, and how we have different characters and villains making appearances, and how Eternity was going to be part of the movie in some way, shape, or form. And there was a lot of attention on this book, and then the movie came and went, and the attention on this book also came and went. But I really thought this was a pretty striking book in terms of condition. Now, this too was listed in a Fine Plus. And I mean, again, some of the other things, like that's not a Fine Plus corner. That's like a 9.2, 9.4 type of corner. I would argue possibly even a 9.8 corner. I mean, that's tremendous. And so this is where it does pay to look at the scans. Just super nice. And again, down there, again, that edge, that you could argue on a modern book, that's probably a 9.4, as that color break along the edge just is long enough to move it out of a 9.8 and even a 9.6. But I was just very happily surprised to see this. And while I can't look at the 300 plus items that they list, I think 4 times a week, maybe even 5 times a week, using my methodology of narrowing things down to a subset, I was able to give the scan of this book enough attention where I realized that this is a really nice copy. So this may end up grading out a little bit higher than a 6.5, and I think it pays to review those scans. I know I typically buy a lot of books sight unseen, but this is where I'm hopefully kind of evolving and changing how I do things, but feel like it was definitely worth it to see a scan of that book. Okay, the next one is Fantastic Four 183, and this is a book that was listed in very fine plus condition, otherwise known as an 8.5. And I want to go ahead and take one of these out of the bag and board. I didn't want to take one of the older books just because I was a little nervous to handle them and didn't want to get Cool Ranch Dorito fingerprints on any of them. But I wanted to zoom in on this and see. So the first thing, as soon as I took it out of the bag, and you can kind of see with the reflection, very, very glossy cover, very bright. The white background that's kind of behind the trade and running through the cover is super bright. So what that told me is a good shot at being white pages, which I think this is. So that ended up working out. And then trying to make sure that the back cover isn't too terribly dirty. So looks like this was just printed yesterday in terms of the color quality. But let's look at the structure of the book and the shape. So this was a very fine plus. And there is the corner or edge of the book. and that looks pretty good to me. I don't see any issues there. I think I'm seeing just some slight color rub here, but not too bad. And then I do notice a couple of color breaking ticks that are almost hidden, but right here are the two ticks that I see in there. And then as I go down the spine, I don't see much else being a problem. And then the bottom corner here is just barely soft, but I mean, it's fairly sharp. I think that that would still make the book be considered a 9.8 candidate if there were nothing else wrong with it. But with those two spine ticks, oh, it's close. I would say that it's probably, let's just jump to 9.4. It has a little bit of creasing, and right here by the Human Torch's foot, there's a couple of dimples right in here that would need to be pressed out. So, 9.2 to 9.4 is kind of what I'm thinking. But when I'm checking the scans, I don't do it too fast, but I do need to move on because I have a lot of books to look at. I'm just checking out all the corners. That corner looks fine. This one does as well. I'm looking for dog ears, color breaks on the corners, like flaps, folds, color rub, dirt. This book looks great. I mean, if I didn't know what kind of condition this were listed in, and someone just asked me, I'm thinking probably around a 9. This corner here is problematic. I would say it's basically torn on the back. If you look from the front, it seems to be better from a presentation standpoint. But I probably would settle in on a 9.0 on this one. You could make the case that their Very Fine Plus is accurate, but I could also make the case that if we had a couple of these things that were buffed out and pressed, is this a 9.4? Maybe. Is it a 9.2? It's certainly possible. And so that was kind of influencing the types of books that I wanted to bid on. But that's an example of a book that they list in Very Fine Plus that I target, and I adjust my bid ranges accordingly. And that Fantastic Four book, not a key book, but certainly a desirable book if I am able to ultimately get that book graded out in a 9.0 or above. Next is Fantastic Four 186. Now, this one, I don't quite know what happened. Now, Fantastic Four 186, this was listed as a VF minus and is the first appearance of Salem's 7. Now, again, I'm not buying books necessarily for MCU movie, Disney Plus TV show type speculation, but there was some linking of this book to well, I don't know what it's called now, but it's the Agatha Harkness show. They've changed the name a few times, but hopefully that show's going to be wild and crazy, and who knows what kind of characters they're going to bring into that one. And Salem 7 was, I think, linked to that show at one point or another. And I got this book for about $5. I thought it was a great pickup, especially in that VF minus. Now, again, what I look for here are, just as I mentioned, like try and get as sharp a corner as possible, not too many color breaks. In fact, I don't really see any on this spine. It looks really, really clean, which is nice. Solid corner down here as well. And so that's where it's worth looking at the photo, because the difference between a VF minus, VF, and a VF plus, even a 9.0 very fine near mint, I don't know how much time they're really spending on grading these books and being so precise and particular. They have a lot of books to move every week. There's a crease there. But again, I don't mind the creasing at all because I trust the pressers that I use to work these out, but it looks really great otherwise. I mean, for a VF minus $5 with some light speculation and extremely minor key, the first team appearance of Salem 7, Bruticus, Gazelle, Hydra, Reptilla, Thorn, Valium, Vertigo, and these are a group of witches that are specifically selected by Nicholas Scratch, and Nicholas Scratch, who first appeared in issue 185, could make an appearance in the Agatha Harkness show. I think he was a rabbit the first time around, so who knows what kind of form he'll take this time. But anyway, I thought it was worth the shot. I'll probably get that one cleaned up with a bit of a press. And again, I'd love to see that book get up into the 9.0 range when it was advertised as a 7.5. Okay, next up, another Fantastic Four book, Fantastic Four 199. This was a $4 pickup, listed in Very Fine Plus condition. I see one nasty color breaking tick right there that breaks color right behind Dr. Doom himself. There he is. And there's Doom Again, great colors, and just me thinking that this was a bit undergraded. Now, what I will say is when I look at these books up close, there are some hidden defects. So it's not like this is an automatic if you see a VF plus that it's actually a near mint plus or anything crazy. Like that corner is going to cause some problems. But I do think that in general, they're probably a grade or two undergraded, but only if you look at the scans. I think that there are a lot of VF pluses that they list that aren't VF pluses that are in worse shape, but there are some that are better, and it just requires a little bit of extra time and attention on your part to find them. Here's one I think I found. This is Amazing Spider-Man 285, Gang War Part 2, Mike Zeck cover with the Punisher. This one was listed as a VF minus. And what I notice about this book is it is miswrapped. And while I'm not a fan of miswrapped comics, sometimes the spine is just better protected in that way. And so this could get a pass as even something like a 9.4 or even higher. The corners look nice and sharp all around. Great colors on this one too. Amazing Spider-Man 285. Okay, next is a 20-cent DC cover. This is Adventure Comics number 435. This was advertised as a 7.0, and again, what I noticed was that there were a lot of creases that I could tell from the scan. You can see here, even through the bag and board, that it is heavily creased. But the spine itself is structurally really good, and I think it has a really nice opportunity to clean up really well with a proper press. And I love these cover designs. It's kind of like a picture frame design, lots of different colors, but yet they work. And while this isn't necessarily considered to be, a classical or typical Bronze Age horror, Silver Age horror book, or anything that really would constitute your hardcore underground horror comics collectors, I think it's right up there. Weird adventure comics, so it's got the word weird in it, so it must be pretty scary or weird. But nevertheless, I thought this was a book to pick up to just see how much cleanup and improvement it could really get, because you can see those creases in there. That is very typical of a common pressable defect that comes out really nicely with a press, as long as there's no reversion on a book like this. But yeah, the color breaks are minimal. I see a couple just hairline right in here. You see one right there, but really nice otherwise. Again, sharp corners. So if you're just like, hey, don't stare at the creases there by the DC logo, but you can see on that corner, just very nice, very sharp, and kind of what you'd expect to see on a brand new book or a book in a 9/8 that has kind of the older school newspaper type paper. Okay, we've got another DC book. This is Allstar Comics, number 63. This was also listed as a VF. This was a book, I ended up bidding on it. I think I remember this book. I think just for the particular age, I ended up throwing up kind of a medium bid, and I ended up winning. And I think that what ended up happening is I think people like me were looking at the scans and just saying, nope, this isn't a VF, so I'm going to pass on it. It does have several color breaking ticks. I'll stop and show you a couple, like right down here by the barcode. Corner looks just slightly dinged. Overall, not bad, but could end up kind of grading out around a 7 or a 7.5 and not an 8 as advertised, but it was around $5 for the pickup, so I threw a small bid on it and ended up winning. Okay, now the last book, this one was a book that I definitely splurged on, and it is a newsstand copy of this book. And while I am far from a newsstand snob, I do understand the collectability of these, in particular, like as we move into kind of the next phase of comic book collecting moving forward. I do feel that there will be some focus put on newsstands from the copper and early modern age and other price variants, Canadian price variants, Mark Jewelers, things like that. I think that there's going to be folks that will target those just like they did modern variants and said, oh, this 1 in 100 is really scarce. And now like 1 in 100s, I mean, I was getting them from Gmart on Black Friday for like $10. I mean, it's not something that speculators can really push on us anymore. So I think the next thing that, and not that this is a new area or new territory, but I think that there will be a greater emphasis on these types of books going forward. So I'm not buying newsstands, so please don't freak out. Don't turn off the video. I'm not turning into a newsstand collector, but I have a direct copy of this book already graded. This book was listed in very fine condition. I agonized and scrutinized the scan as best I could, and to me, it looked better than a VF, and so I thought I would take a shot, and it is upside down, but it is Amazing Spider-Man number 298. This is, now I'll just say it, it's the first appearance of Venom. It's considered a cameo, but he does appear in here. Now, at first glance, the book looks extremely yellow, so I don't quite understand that. The yellowing of the book might be hard to pick up on camera, but I'll switch here to a backing board so you can kind of see the difference. It's not quite, I guess the BLED community calls it bone white. But nevertheless, I thought for a newsstand copy, I had thought that this was probably a 9.2. So I probably overpaid to pick it up because I thought it was a book that condition-wise had a really good chance of grading out higher than it was listed as. And this is a book, too, that you can find on Mile High Comics, maybe not the newsstand, but really hesitated to pay as much money as they were asking for a book like this. Now, here's something that, as I was talking, I noticed, and I believe these are color-breaking ticks. It's almost like they're directly on the side of the spine, and yes, they are wrapping through. I have to check and make sure that that's not the cover art on the back, so this may end up being around an 8 or an 8.5. I think that when that happens, though, CGC in particular will give a book a little bit of a benefit of the doubt if it has sharp corners, which when I was reviewing the scans, I noticed that's what this book had. I didn't see any issue at all with the corners. They looked just perfect to me, and they look perfect in person. No fraying, no rounding, no softening, so super sharp. So I think that when you're kind of like looking at books and you're kind of adding up the defects and figuring out what should the grade be, what score should I give, I think that books that have really strong corners, really solid structure, but have spine ticks, I think that they are a little bit more forgiving ultimately. I used to just completely scrutinize a book and focus in on color-breaking ticks along the spine. And not that I was ignoring the corners, but what I think I've realized is that there is a greater emphasis on sharp corners. So that I'm not trying to justify the purchase if this ends up being an 8, but I thought it was worth a shot. Love Todd McFarlane, love collecting Amazing Spider-Man, and I think Amazing Spider-Man is just such a blue chip title that even if you go wrong, you can't really go wrong with that. But really happy with these pickups from Infinity Comics. So what did you think about these books that I picked up at auction from Infinity Comics? I know I only opened up one book for grading, but in general, how did the books look to you? Do you think that they were undergraded? Do you think that they're fairly accurate? I think that personally, there's maybe half the books would benefit from a clean and press. And I'm thinking benefit in terms of not just identifying pressable defects, but also just thinking about the value and the types of grade bumps that could potentially move these books into, I would say, more of a collectible grade range. I have to be careful because when I'm reviewing the conditions of these books, sometimes it's not worth slabbing some of these because the prices and values in the market have dropped, yes, but traditionally and historically there haven't been values for some of these books in that sort of 6 to 7.5 or even 8.0 range. So for me, it's very important to identify books that could benefit from some CPR, but also to make sure that I'm not bidding on a book at a specific grade that kind of falls in that range of conditions where the book just isn't collectible or desirable in that condition. And sometimes the ceiling on that is quite high. And so I have to be careful when I'm looking at those books, because even in an 8.0, sometimes, like I would say, the Fantastic Four books, maybe something like this, like a Fantastic Four 199 in a 7.0. Yes, there's Doctor Doom on the cover, but you go through the process of getting that pressed and clean and graded in a 7.0, and then you're kind of stuck with it. So that's where I'm looking at it, and I'll have to run the numbers and just kind of see if it kind of crosses that threshold in terms of books that would be worthwhile to go ahead and send in. Let me know what you think. Feel free to leave a comment on this video. Thanks for watching. Happy collecting, and see you next time.